Byron, so welcome, and welcome to Retail Reboot with me, Angus Byron. We've had a bit of a conversation just now, and obviously you're from Avenue51 doing great things. I wonder if you'd be kind enough just to give a quick snippet, an idea to the audience of what Avenue51 is all about.
Okay, no, thanks. Avenue51 is the biggest online exporter of consumer goods to mainland China from the UK. So we've been operating for about 5 years now. We have about 150 people. A third of them are based in the UK. The rest are in mainland China, Shanghai, Hangzhou, and Beijing. And we operate around about 100 brands right now. We're not a distributor. We essentially effectively enable these brands to operate what we call a direct-to-consumer model. So we help them essentially build their market share and really understand the China market and grow quite considerably. Our turnover this year, I think, is about, well, I think last year was 45, so about 60 million it should be this year of British consumer goods. A lot of those are in the mother and baby category, wellness, which is doing really well in mainland China, food, and brands like Waitrose, which we exclusively help operate in mainland China, and they've done very well.
Great. Great. And you've been at Avenue51 for about 3 years, I think I'm right in saying, with a history of director level positions before that. What made you choose Avenue51?
Actually, I did like this question. Very rarely do I get asked it. You're correct. It's more or less my first job as an adult was Avenue51 after living in China for most of my adult life. When I was in China, and at the tail end, I was enabling British horse racing to live stream into China and to turn it into a spectator sport, which was really exciting. But then my wife said, okay, the children are big enough. We've got to go back to England, and they're at school in Cambridge now. So I came back here and was introduced to more the academic sort of groups in Cambridge. And I was lucky I became a member of the Hawks Club here and sort of introduced to all of the masters of the college. And I kind of set about working on a project which was to try and understand what would be retail in the future with all this innovation that was going on, and particularly where I'd come from in China. And it was actually when I was at the Masters Lodge in Trinity that it was an incredible group, and I presented my project that I was working on and kind of scoffed at. And it was suggested to me that I needed to have what they call a thinking machine, or a model that I could use to sort of think this problem through. And I had no idea what they were talking about. And there was this one old chap that gave me this framework, which was absolutely lovely. He said, Byron, you need what they call, I remember it clearly, a watchmaker's watch. And I had no idea. And I was sitting in this Harry Potter sort of style environment with all these men with their big capes on and sort of, and he said, you need to construct a model that you can think through, like a thinking machine. And he gave me a framework and said, go away, next time I see you, show me what you have. So his idea was this, is that when a watchmaker creates a watch, that he creates it to be perfect timing. So it keeps accurate timing. It has 12 sections per day. But if he was to create a watch for himself, he would actually want to make it run much faster. So every minute he gets 5 minutes, because he wants to essentially get more time out of his life and make more money. And so he forced me to construct this watch, and it's relevant because it'll explain every question that essentially you'll ask me in the future. But essentially we constructed this watch based on 4 quadrants. And it's instead of 12, which is what a normal watch does. And the first part of the quadrant was when the watchmaker thinks about making his stock. And that starts at 12 o'clock. And then at 3 o'clock, he wants his watches made. He then wants to share it with people and get them excited about it. So he tells his friend or whatever. And then and at 6 o'clock, he makes sure the watch is in the shop and that somebody can buy it. And then somebody buys it, and if he hasn't got it in display, then he has to, at 9 o'clock, he has to ship it to the person. Now he's completed the cycle, and then he creates another watch, and he goes through it. And now the second time he does it, he wants to be more efficient. So he asks an apprentice to make the second watch. And so the second cycle didn't take him 12 hours. For example, the second time it took him 9 hours to do it, until he gets to the point where the second hand is spinning really, really fast. And so he's optimizing every single quadrant in his sort of in his cycle, until, as I said, it's going really, really fast, and that's the clockmaker's watch. So they helped me invent that model, and it was interesting. So once I'd got it and we'd mapped it out, I didn't have anybody to try it on. Very, very fortunate that I'd met Chow, one of the founders of Avenue51, and I'd explained to him that I thought there was a way that we could start to optimize the way that retailers work, and particularly in global e-commerce. And he said, well, do you want to try an Avenue51 and try it and put it into effect? So that Monday I came into the office with this kind of framework that I'd got from this 400-year-old sort of fellows club, and we started to put it into effect, and we built the framework. We took all of the operations from Avenue51, how they were working with the brands, and started to deploy this. And it was quite fortunate, because the first brand that accepted this model has now become our fastest growing brand in Avenue51. So it really worked out. So this concept of having, as I said, a cycle has really helped me. And that was how I joined Avenue51, not really to do anything except to present them with something that was completely unfounded. They allowed me to build it.
I don't think anyone would guess that the way in which you're working at Avenue51, a business that's working with so much technology and forward-thinking e-commerce, would have come out of it as such an old institution and group of people like that.
Well, it's
amazing, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you've got sort of, Nobel Prize winners. It's and in these rooms, and it's the way that they think. They can apply their mind to anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I mean, of course, they're applying it to some of the most complex problems in the world. But actually, when you listen to the way that they think, they can apply it to anything. And borrowing that 1 ounce of sort of experience that they had really helped me to think things through. So I've been a little bit fortunate in that way. But that's how it all started.
Amazing. And what for you, this is probably a huge question, Byron, but what has been the biggest change that you've seen in retail?
Okay, so recently, as I said, I've only been back in the UK sort of for a few years. I mean, living in China and seeing the transformation there over 15 years prior to that was, sort of really blew me away. So coming back to the UK, it was a bit different. I mean, I remember going to Tesco's and them asking me to register for a club card, I think they call it, and then they had to post it to me, and then I had to carry it in my wallet. I mean, even in China that hadn't existed for a few years, and I was really surprised. So I sort of, there's two things that I've seen. Firstly is globalization, and I think a lot of brands are now realizing that the 70 million customers in the UK are not enough anymore, because those 70 million customers are buying from all the world now, particularly through Amazon and platforms like that. And so therefore for them to compete is much harder. So globalization, I think, is the first thing I'd say most retailers have changed, that they understand that they're not constrained now. And secondly is what I call the value of the post customer. I think you alluded to it a little bit earlier on. One of the discoveries that came out when we started applying this model to the way that people shop, particularly in China, is that when somebody actually buys a product, they will go on, as long as they're assuming that they have a reasonably good experience, they will go on average, and that they will influence the purchase behavior of 3 more customers. So what came out of that, particularly when you talk to brands like Waitrose, and you're working with these people that are amazing at modeling and mathematicians, is that actually when you've actually completed a transaction, you've actually only got 25% of the value. The rest of it is about to come afterwards. So if you think about it, it's actually more important after the transaction to focus on the customer and making it easy for them to share and to meet it, rather than before. It's almost the complete reverse of the logic that you've had for hundreds of years. Is you were talking about it around get the customer, put all the money, get the customer, and then that's the end of the, as far as you're concerned, you've got your money. Well, you've only got a small fraction of the return on investment that you get. And this post-customer focus, and you can see it with brands like Gymshark that really honed in on this side of things, is that they're accelerating really, really quickly. So that would be the second part, I think, is going to be probably the biggest transformational part of retail over the next decade, aside from all the technology that's going on. But it's the thinking pattern of shifting away from pre-transaction to post-transaction. Is somebody's bought something, now you want your money.
Yeah.
Not before it was.
That's really interesting, actually, for me particularly. I mean, something, I mean, in my business, you know, in payments, something that I used to talk about in my previous company a lot was another little phrase that we coined, which was APEX, and that was an acronym for the After Payment Emotional Experience. And essentially saying what you just said there. Now, what happens once you've made that payment? Are you going to make that journey difficult if someone wants to have a refund? Are you going to make it difficult for them to have an exchange online, having bought something in store? It's so many different permutations to that, but it's about making things really easy for a consumer once they've engaged with and bought from you as a retailer, as a business, in order that they want to come back. Now, Byron, what innovations have you seen to adapt to the restrictions of coronavirus, not necessarily just in the UK, but internationally across Europe, and obviously with you particularly in China, I suspect?
Yeah, it's so the one thing I try and sum it up, because I mean there's lots of technological sort of innovations and small incremental sort of gains that we've seen, but the one thing that is the transformation is the definition of shop. If you look at it, it's moved away from being a noun to becoming a verb. And once a brand gets that, we have one brand that has about 60 stores across China. And he was bringing this up to me. He said, beforehand, we think of shop as a physical place. Yeah. We don't anymore. Shop is a verb. It's what somebody does. And actually, it doesn't matter where they do it. And they had their stores closed for 3 months. And they realized that their sales, the momentum continued, even though they didn't have any physical stores open. And so their whole management has shifted this idea that a shop is a verb. And every time that they think about if they're investing in opening up a new store, can that money be invested better somewhere else in terms of making somebody shop? It's quite fascinating because to hire a new sales assistant in the center of Grimsby in a tiny little store costs the same as a complete online strategy in mainland China. So you can see that sort of £15,000 invested in enabling the whole of China to be able to buy and receive products, as opposed to having a counter staff in Grimsby. The transformation of thinking is huge. So I'd say that's the one thing that startled me most, particularly coming from this major brand, on how that they've transformed their thinking. And I think that will continue.
That's a major change. No, I agree with you. And particularly there's been lots of conversation recently and sort of on the market and amongst retailers, is the high street dead? What do we need to do to reboot the high street? Where do we move our traffic, etc.? But I think thinking laterally has to be part of what businesses do, and good use of technology. How do you think? One thing I was looking obviously on your website and your profile, the importance of logistics during retail holidays is something I'm aware of, but to be completely honest, not 100% familiar with. But 11/11, the singles holiday in China, which has huge volumes of retail traffic. How do you think retail holidays will change what they do in terms of logistics in coming years in order to cope with volumes like that? Will things become entirely online in order for that to happen?
No, it's a good question. So 11/11, the one big mistake I seem to encounter over and over again when talking to brands at 11/11. 11/11 doesn't create desire. 11/11 converts desire into money. So if you look at brands that are doing really well on 11/11, they're already famous. People want it, but often they're luxury purchases, and they're thinking, well, I'm not going to buy it now. It's not a priority, but on 11/11, I will buy it. And this is why brands like Dyson and a lot of the cosmetics brands do really well. They're sort of, you buy that during, and probably all throughout the year, you've been thinking about buying it. It's been at the back of your head. It's sitting in your basket psychologically. And then when 11/11 comes, you buy it because it's 50% off. But typically, so we have a lot of brands that do join 11/11 and they don't do well because there's no prior demand created for those brands. And what they do is they suddenly discount. So nobody wants the product, and then they discount. And so people see it, they may buy it, but it's not a huge impact on their whole strategy. So I try and make that clear understanding. And I think this is going to continue, is that 11.11s, shopping festivals will, as I said, will convert desire into money, but it won't create desire in itself. Or fundamentally, I mean, it does to a certain degree. But
so it's normally an unnecessary luxury purchase, which has already been thought about.
Or you're already buying it. It's and you want, and suddenly you'll stock up on it because it's 11.11. So the desire is already there. It doesn't create desire. Now, for us, we tend to know which products, which SKUs are in desire in China because they're already selling well. So then our job is to move it to China. Now, the one thing that's really enabled a lot of brands like Waitrose, we sell millions and millions of jars of honey to consumers in China. Why are they buying British honey? It's the perception of the brand, the value proposition, etc. But we move a lot of honey into China. Now, when we move it by train, which is typically how we're moving the products now, it's taking around about 3 weeks to get the product to Bonded Fulfillment Center. And maybe it costs 10p to move that jar of honey all the way to China. So if you think about it, that stock, if you move it from, I don't know, London to Liverpool, it costs more than that. So all of a sudden, for a brand like Waitrose to have that stock sitting in China, knowing there's already demand for it and it's going to sell, actually, it's not much of a decision to make. So the product sits in China, it's very close to the consumer. So the logistics side, as you just tapped into, is making it almost it almost questions why you're selling to the shopper in the UK, whereas your stock can be sitting in China, close to 1 billion people, just for the same price. So this is the one, a lot of questions that are coming out, and I find it quite fascinating that, as I said, brands like Waitrose are starting to discover that a new shopper in China is actually the same or less cost than a new shopper in the UK because they have to compete so aggressively in the cost here.
And I guess that takes a few or a lot of retailers a bit of time to get their head around that concept that how can it be cheaper and cheaper to deliver, yet more cost effective and a better ROI to do something the other side of the world than it can on our doorstep.
Precisely, yeah, and that goes back to that question about globalization. I think most people don't understand that right now. That the Silk Road initiative that China put in place and heavily subsidizes really is to the benefit of British retail and brands right now.
And do you think there'll be a similar effect with Black Friday? I mean, you touched on something really interesting there. So something I have said and thought in the past is that this heavy discounting, which we see internationally now, quite frankly, but certain brands discount at certain times of year, and as a consumer, that discount's coming. So why buy it now? Why don't I say to little Johnny that actually I know your birthday is in December, Johnny, but what we're going to do, we're going to get you a book in December, and in the January sale, we're going to buy you that amazing bicycle because I know it's going to be half price.
Precisely.
Is that okay, Johnny? Absolutely great. And I see this. I benefit personally from brands discounting because I do exactly what I've just described. I wait until the discount comes, and happy days, I save myself a few £100s. But I also see that as really, really devaluing the brand itself. And consumers start to question, well, why is this ever for sale at £500 when I can get it for 280 in January? And I know that the business must still be making profit, otherwise they wouldn't sell it. And consumers start to question that mentality. Do you think?
I'd say it's not entirely that way. And we've got evidence of this. For example, if you look at brands like Manuka Honey, which is, if you go into, Manuka Honey is £40, but pretty much if you go into Holland and Barrett any day of the week, you can get it for half the price. But the perception still is that Manuka Honey is worth £40, and that's been going on for years. And that's the same in China. So I think it's really important that you maintain the brand identity and the perception of the brand being of high value. And then you sort of use the discounting as a way to accelerate sales. But again, it goes back to that. You've got to set that desire first. There's a very famous phrase that I've come across in China, is that they call it the rotten shrimp model. Is that you go to the market at the end of the day, and the man says, look, for £1 I'll sell you bucket of rotten shrimp, but for 50p, I'll sell you two. For a total of 50p, I'll sell you two. So essentially, he'll sell you more rotten shrimp for less money to get rid of it. And I think that's what happens if you go straight in with the discounting, is that you suddenly, if the first time they perceive your brand is as a discounted brand, and no one's saying anything or sharing any enthusiasm, then that's exactly what you are. You're worthless. But if you can go in there and spend half the year at a standard price, and as I said, and Dyson have done really well. It was with this, and also a lot of the cosmetics brands like Charlotte Tilbury, and it's that they know that 25% of their sales will happen on one day of the year.
Amazing.
And it's the same for us. I mean, there's a number of brands we will do 25% in November, and we accept that now, because we know that the rest of the year people are just like you waiting to make that purchase. But we set that desire, and we know the purchases will happen. So I think it's a way of life now.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. So Avenue51, you're an online retail solution used by, as I understand it, more than 100 leading British brands, which include, and I've got some written down here because I can't remember all of them, Waitrose, Aspinal, a favorite brand of mine, Cow and Gate. However, you're growing a new solution, I think I've read correctly, E51, which is built specifically for early stage businesses entering the Chinese market. Can you talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, so E51 was the official name for the clockmaker's watch. It was I couldn't go out with that name. So E51, essentially what we did was we took the solutions that we built for major brands like Waitrose, it was a Cow and Gate, and we looked at how could we simplify this or turn it into a standardized model using those 4 quadrants that we essentially were working around. So we took that, we had a standard contract, we had standard best practices, and so that any brand could come on and sign up instantly to join E51. So it was the first model that we released, first solution that we released. And one of the brands, Optipack, which is a probiotic brand, was one of the first to join. The CEO there, he's quite a visionary, and he liked the idea and he joined. And it's a subscription-based model. You just pay a monthly fee and everything's all bundled in. And as I said, they've become probably our fastest growing brand this year, after sort of adopting that model and sort of making it work. And they've done really well.
Okay, great. So one of the initiatives you're driving, I don't know if you call it 1010 or 1010. Tell us more about the process and how it will help British brands enter the Chinese market.
Yeah, so 1010 came out. So after sort of collecting a lot of evidence about how that the E51 solution was working, I noticed that with the beauty and the wellness and fitness space is that they were much more dependent on that one quadrant, which we call share. So the 4 quadrants, if you want to give them names, it was stock, share. So sharing is when people, it was a shop, which is when it gets listed, and then ship, when the product gets sent there. So you have this 4S kind of concept. But the part where I noticed that beauty brands and fitness brands were accelerating or really doing well was in this sharing segment, is that they would give their products to people, and people would try it, and because of social media, they would share their experience. I mean, if you get a new pair of tires on your car or a new pen, you don't really get on there and tell everybody about it. But you do seem to do it with these cosmetics and wellness and fitness, and particularly if you nudge the shopper a little bit to do it, they seem to be quite enthusiastic. So that particular category really had were really doing well with social media. And so what we did was, from the E51 model, we kind of rebuilt a model which had so much more emphasis on that sharing quadrant there. And we were quite lucky because Avenue51 is we also have a courier side of the business, which about 40,000 Chinese expats that are living in the UK, they use our courier side to ship Body Shop, whatever they're buying, back to their friends and family in China. So we tend to see what types of products that they're shipping. And so we went to that group. We immediately said to that group and said, look, we have loads of cosmetic brands and fitness brands. Would you be interested in trying them out? We'll give it to you for free. And then you post a review on Chinese social media. They were really happy because they got free products to try. The brands were ecstatic because all of a sudden on social media, they were being talked about. And because a lot of social media right now, like Little Red Book, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's kind of on that particular, if you post on there, it's public, so everybody can see your post. And there's brands like Perfect Diary, which is completely, they're one of the fastest growing cosmetic brands in the world now, just listing on NASDAQ. They started off just by getting people without many followers just to post their experience on Chinese social media. And because so many people are searching on these social media right now, that it had a massive strong effect on their brand. And so essentially that's what we did, was we took that particular resource that we had of 40,000 Chinese expats, shifted it into our share segment, and now we've gone to all of the beauty brands and fitness brands and said, you give us a product, we'll give it to you, and they'll review it for you. You don't even need to find your own anymore. And what it's done is it's just accelerated the number of beauty brands that are now using this.
And that's something you continue on an ongoing basis. That's
correct. And so we only launched it on the 10th this year. Officially launched it, and it already has 7 brands that are already using that solution, which is quite, very fast for us. But what we're aiming for is also 1010 is a play on words, and it actually means in Chinese, when you say 试试 1010, it sounds like try this product. So what we have is this community. We ask them to not only try the product, but become part of this sampling community of of cosmetic brands, and post 1010 on their use the hashtag. And the idea is that on the 10th of the 10th next year, that we have thousands, if not tens of thousands of Chinese expats trying products and posting on the same day. So it just takes over, that hashtag takes over on it. And because it's a month before 11/11, it's that day where you create desire. So the whole idea is when people are trying it and they're using it and saying, this is amazing, they're not saying discount. They're just saying that this is an incredible product. A month later, that product is on discount, and then you buy it. So we positioned the whole 1010 concept for this particular category, and we think it'll do quite well.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it. So it's doing exactly what you were saying earlier. It's building that brand awareness in advance of the 11/11.
Precisely, yeah. And what it does is, again, I always go back to this mad old professor in this club room. It's moving the dial through that share segment really, really quickly right now. Yeah. Because beforehand, when I'd say to a brand, you need to get somebody sharing their experience, it was a very clumsy process that they had to find somebody, get the product to them. But now we already have the logistics in place. We have those people. So it accelerates the speed. We can get 50 products out and people reviewing it in a day or so. And it just shortens that whole process. So I'm hoping that it'll have quite a strong effect on the success of more British.
Fingers crossed, we'll see that grow year on year, I suspect.
Yeah, the 1010 should be the
and until you think it's something play on words for 99 in advance of 1010 and 11/11.
99 already exists. It's because 9 is the play on words for drink. Alcohol. Yeah. So Jiu is already a big one, but I mean the other big shopping festival is 618, which means be super lucky and really wealthy if you play on the numbers there. So so we're hoping to own 1010.
Very good. And tell me, slightly selfishly, but payments obviously is what I do, despite this blog. But what part do payments play in what you're doing when a British retailer is entering the Chinese market?
Yeah, it's so my feeling it was, and I think everybody should be contacting you if they're a brand, is that payment shouldn't be a discussion with a consumer. Is that as soon as the majority of the work that you're doing as a brand, the hard stuff is building the product, getting it in front of them, trying it, and actually getting them to the checkout. That's really, really difficult. If you have to make it more complicated, or if you're going to make it inconvenient for them to pay, which is not your business, you're not selling payment systems as a shop. That has to be an invisible part. That has to happen all instantaneously. Is that if the brand is having that conversation with their consumers about what payment they're using, I think there's a problem that brand needs to overcome. That conversation was very 1995 or whatever. Is that what payment system? Right now, for us, every single shopper when they go on, it takes them around about half a second to actually make the payment transfer
Yeah.
in whatever form that they want to use. Now, naturally, in China, that is easier because most people are using Alipay or WeChat Pay platforms. But the point is that you would never even consider it as a brand or a retailer in China to make it difficult for people to give you money after going to all of that effort. And so when I tend to, for every brand that we work with, we solve that problem. We take the money, we set up the payment system, and we pay the brands typically 28 days from the end of each month. So which is just we get paid around about the same time, and we pay the brand in pound sterling, and we get paid in pound sterling as well because it's a cross-border e-commerce transaction. But my feeling is if the brand is having that conversation in saying, well, should we accept payment? If you've got Chinese customers, you should just be saying it's like saying, should we open the door or not? Of course the door should be unlocked in your shop. People should be able to come in. That's not even a conversation. So I think that everybody should be contacting you and saying, make this go away. This is a legacy system.
I'm thrilled to hear you say that. Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely exactly where we are. In fact, one of the things I've often said when talking about payments, even as I suppose, even though I'm not a techie, I would probably refer to myself a little bit as a payments geek. That considered, whether I bought something online, in store, via a mobile app, I've never metaphorically walked away from that purchase and thought, what an amazing payments experience. Because I thought, I can't wait for my new suit to arrive, or I can't, because that's what a customer thinks. They don't want to have this amazing experience. It needs to be invisible, it needs to be intuitive, and it needs to just happen. And that's what we're absolutely trying to advocate. We have Alipay, WeChat Pay, etc. We're principal members of China Union Pay, so that's something we're quite focused on anyway. Tell me, slightly conscious of time, but Avenue51, you've been offering advice after the UK government announced that duty-free shipping is to replace duty-free shopping from January 2021. This is, I guess, a serious threat for many of Britain's famous brands who don't have a scalable UK to China shipping solution in place. Are you able to share any advice for decision makers who may be affected by this? And slightly second question, what will the future look like for duty-free shopping?
So the common, so let's make the assumption that this is going to happen and we've got to make the best of the situation, which I always make the assumption, or it seems to be that way. So shoppers come to China, and typically, I'm talking from Chinese sort of shoppers' perspective, they're buying something that's slightly premium. So to ship it back to China actually is not, the cost of that is not particularly high compared to the cost of the product. So the good news is that there is margin enough in there to be able to afford to ship it back. The other benefit that I believe this will be transformational for a lot of these British retailers that haven't been forced to make a decision on this. Because what will happen is that it's very, very easy and quick for a brand to set up a product page on a WeChat, which is what Chinese use to sort of surf the internet. It's to set it up and for that consumer to be able to make that purchase in a store and then have the product shipped back to China for them. In fact, the customs clearance, right now it's 9.1% to clear customs for general category products through cross-border e-commerce. So I don't think that that's going to be a threat, the fact that duty-free is being withdrawn. It will have to a certain degree, but I think if the smart retailers like the Selfridges, it was the Harvey Nichols, what they're doing is that they're saying, okay, well now the shopper can come in, they can pay on WeChat, and then when they get back to China, actually they know that product page, they know where it is. So if they want to share it with their friend, when their friend says, where did you get that handbag? Well, they can actually, you have movable product pages now, so their friend can buy it really easily. So I believe that going back to that earlier conversation out of that post-transaction being more valuable than the pre-transaction, actually that's what the retailers will focus on now, is that post-transaction is just getting the product back, but actually the repeat business or the referral business that will come through from that. So I don't think the biggest threat, the biggest problem I think we're going to face is whether the pound rises against the renminbi. in my experience, when I deal with my friends and family that come from China, is that's the thing that affects them most. So I believe the pound still is at a very competitive rate, and so people will continue, if they were coming to the UK, they would. But if you think about it, if we'd had this system in place for the last 2 to 3 years, Chinese shoppers that have made millions and millions of purchases would already know where those product pages were, and they would be repeat purchasing. Whereas right now, I think the British retailers have put themselves in a situation where the customers don't know how to repeat purchase. And they could have solved
a bit of a non-issue, and it'll almost force something better.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not saying it. I think it's bad news for the retailers in many ways, because they've got to adapt to a completely new, probably more competitive environment. But I do think that there is a sort of a silver lining that will come out of this, is that the smarter retailers will, as I said, the cost of actually setting up a product page on WeChat is so low right now, and it's it's actually, all you need is a JPEG of the product image. It's a 750 pixel wide JPEG, and as long as you want it, and that's it. And from there, people can buy it. And with our integration sector, that they can actually receive it. We clear customs. I mean, the brand, the UK retailers and brands never touch anything. They just move the stock into our fulfillment centers. So and there are more people like us. We're not the only people that provide this. So I think what you'll find is this acceleration of innovation that will happen as a consequence of this will make all of these retailers, British retailers that will be affected by this, so much more competitive, so much stronger. And I think the ones that move fast will come out very, very healthy.
That makes sense. That makes sense. In a recent article, I saw you'd mentioned that with the end of duty-free shopping and ongoing Brexit complexities, tourists that, well, I'd say our economy relies very, very heavily on when we're allowed to travel, certainly. A bit different during these times, but that aside, won't necessarily be popping in for a cup of tea anytime soon. I'd love to hear more about your Plan C proposal for British retailers.
Right. Well, I mean, essentially, it is based on that concept that we just spoke about. Okay. Is that British retailers right now need to be prevalent and really easily accessible. All their products need to be accessible on Chinese eCommerce platforms and social media platforms. And so that really is what I'd love to see more support, particularly from the government, is enable or training up a lot more retailers on how this works. Because once it's the whole concept of teaching a man to fish, but it's once the retailers and the brands understand this, that how effortless it is actually to deliver a product and to work with the customer in China. I think that this concept will shift, will globalize a lot more British brands and retailers. And so that really is my Plan C that I'd like to see, as opposed to, okay, Chinese shoppers are not coming back and probably not coming back very quickly, but the British brands are going to be in China and going to be much more available. And so that's the part I'd love to see much more support for that. And as I said, I think there'll be a globalization benefit for all the brands, that they would take this concept and then replicate it for every emerging country. As Africa becomes stronger, as East Europe starts to be, whichever country it is, it wouldn't matter to the brand or the British retailer anymore. It's the same framework. The
concept is the same. Well, let's fingers crossed. Let's hope we see that grow internationally, as there's no reason it shouldn't these days, really.
It's basic logic right now. Once you sort of, as I said, I'm fortunate because I've been working with Avenue51 for the last 3 years, watching the way that this framework works and how this wheel spins, and so I can see it. But I do understand that a lot of brand sort of leaders haven't seen this innovation in practice, and that's something that somehow we've got to share that knowledge.
Well, hopefully we can we can now share it, or share your knowledge. Certainly. Look, Byron, thank you so much for taking the time. Really enjoyed that discussion, and I'm sure we'll have further discussions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.